And before anyone asks, no. Hobbs & Shaw has neither the charm nor the flair of a Fast and Furious movie, which is why I don't count it as part of the Fast franchise. I don't give a f*** what anybody says. Looper from 2012. Oh, Ruination Johnson, when will you learn? A Good Day to Die Hard from 2013. Okay, if you ask me, Joseph Gordon-Levitt should have been cast as Jack McClane instead of Jai Courtney. I'd watch the shit out of that over whatever the hell Looper is. And B, Die Hard 5 is barely a Die Hard movie. Django Unchained from 2012. I seriously could not get past the first 30 minutes of this fucking movie. G.I. Joe Retaliation from 2013. As a standalone movie, it's generic. As a sequel, it's offensive as f***. Retaliation is not a G.I. Joe movie. It's a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson action movie with G.I. Joe characters sprinkled in, half of whom are bland and underdeveloped, save for Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. While we're on that topic, Snake Eyes, G.I. Joe Origins from 2021. When Andrew Koji is the strongest thing about your movie, you know your movie's in trouble. Don't get me wrong, Koji's brilliant in this. But Henry Golding is not a leading man. See Crazy Rich Asians. Speaking of which, Crazy Rich Asians from 2019. Real talk, I hate Romeo and Juliet. I don't like Romeo and Juliet stories, and I like variations of Romeo and Juliet stories even less. And for that reason, I refuse to watch Crazy Rich Asians. Carol Danvers, the movie, from 2019. Brie Larson's questionable casting aside, at the end of the day, Carol Danvers is not a character who needs to exist in the MCU, and certainly not someone who's worthy of the name Captain Marvel. That honor belongs to Billy Batson. Danvers is a boring-ass character who's as busted as Jean Grey and about as intelligent. Spectre from 2015. This one feels a little bit self-explanatory, but I've got 3 words for you. Why is bald? Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice from 2016. I'm just gonna say it, Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne, Jeremy Irons' Alfred, Superman's redesigned costume, and Gal Gadot's casting as Wonder Woman are the best things about that movie. Everything else can get f***ed. Space Jam: A New Legacy from 2021. Space Jam: A New Legacy is neither a Space Jam movie or a Looney Tunes movie. It's an HBO Max movie guest starring LeBron James and also guest starring some Looney Tunes characters. The RoboCop remake from 2014. Joel Kinnaman is a solid casting choice for Alex Murphy, but like most of the movies on this list, the RoboCop remake is a decent idea that's poorly executed. The fact that it was intended to be rated R certainly doesn't help. While we're on the subject of poorly executed, Transformers: Age of Extinction from the exact same year. The Michael Bay Transformers movies have more than a few screws loose. Revenge of the Fallen and Dark of the Moon are essentially the same damn movie, except one of these has a kick-ass opening moon sequence. But Transformers: Age of Extinction, in addition to wasting both Galvatron and the Dinobots, is just a remake of Armageddon, except replace Bruce Willis with Mark Wahlberg, Liv Tyler with Nicola Peltz, and Ben Affleck with whatever the hell this is. The best thing that ever happened to the live-action Transformers franchise is the Bumblebee movie. Don't at me. Also from that same year, if there's a word I could use to describe Michael Bay's Ninja Turtles, it would range between ugly and unmemorable. 2010's The Last Airbender and 2013's After Earth are kinda easy targets, and realistically should never have made it to the lab. The same could be said about Glass from 2019. And frankly, the less I say about 2017's Power Rangers, the better. Don't any of you motherfuckers get me started on that boring ass shit. The entire Fantastic Beasts franchise from 2017 to 2021. If you look up false advertising in the dictionary, there's a parallel universe Earth where you might find a picture of Fantastic Beasts, Crimes of Grindelwald, and Secrets of Dumbledore next to the definition. As much as I like the casting of Jude Law as Dumbledore, this movie series is called Fantastic Beasts, and too big of a deal is made out of Dumbledore's, quote, relationship with Grindelwald that isn't enough about Newt Scamander or the magical creatures he's trying to save. Nobody wants to hear that Dumbledore used to be in love with Grindelwald. Get the f*** out of my face with that bullshit. And on that note, Grindelwald himself is kind of a boring-ass villain, apparently regardless of which actor is playing the character. And I'll do you one better. Why is Ezra Miller, by the way? No, I'm serious. Why is Ezra Miller? Joker from 2019. Okay, I have a very specific reason for why I haven't seen Joker, and I promise, for really reals, it's not the reason you're thinking. So, to my understanding, in the movie, Joaquin Phoenix's character Arthur Fleck suffers from a condition called pseudo-bulbar effect. Pseudo-bulbar effect is a neurological condition that causes a person to have uncontrollable outbursts of laughing and or crying. And Arthur apparently needs medication and therapy to keep it under control. Now, I do not suffer from pseudobulbar effect, or any neurological conditions that I'm currently aware of. And while I have nothing against people who do suffer from it, because I don't suffer from it, I don't know the first thing about how it works. So I have no idea how legit this movie's portrayal of that condition is. And as such, I'm more than a little suspicious about any inaccuracies. Never mind that this is a movie about a comic book villain. That happens to be one of the many things preventing me from watching Joker. Speaking of therapy, The Matrix Resurrections from 2021. Full disclosure, I've been dancing around whether or not I should even bother seeing this movie because I could not get my mind around this one plot point, arguably the plot point of the first half of Matrix Resurrections. Partly because the main characters of the previous trilogy seem to be in a completely different place from the last time we saw them, never mind the first, and partly because it makes no fucking sense. Now, I haven't sat down to watch Matrix Resurrections because, like the Fast and Furious films, I have a complicated history with this franchise. Unlike the Fast and Furious, it's not one that I'm especially fond of, for reasons I don't have time to get into right now. But as far as I've been able to piece together, and for the sake of context, the idea seems to be that Thomas Anderson, yes, that Thomas Anderson, has been plugged back into the Matrix as a video game designer, where he not only doesn't remember the events of the previous trilogy, but at some point 20 years ago, he apparently took the events of said trilogy and turned it into a series of video games called The Matrix, where his alter ego Neo is essentially a fantasy version of himself, in addition to being the main character of those games. Yes, you heard me. Thomas Anderson is under the impression that the events of the first 3 Matrix films are something he designed, not something that actually happened to him. Except now, Thomas is starting to suspect that there might be more to the games than he might believe. To make matters even more complicated, despite Thomas apparently being burnt out on the game series and wanting to do something new with his time, there's a whole ass plot point about how Warner Brothers wants Thomas and the company he works for to make a 4th Matrix game, and they plan on doing so with or without his help, because apparently the trilogy of games isn't enough. Okay, so this might sound like a stupid question, but why did Thomas Anderson make the Matrix games? Setting aside the question of why would you make Warner Brothers a character in your own movie, obviously the real answer to this question is because this new version of the Matrix is trying to keep Neo isolated. Though I'm not sure what possessed them to do this to a dead person, and furthermore I question why you would plug this anomaly back into a Matrix that didn't spawn him, knowing that he's a threat to you. Furthermore, and special thanks to Juke Jonathan for pointing this out in a spoiler video, I also question why the machines running this new version of the Matrix wants Thomas Anderson / Neo to make a 4th Matrix game if the games themselves are supposed to be a suppression of his actual memories. But I can't help but wonder, what in-universe reason did Thomas Anderson have for making the Matrix games? What was the thought process that led Thomas to that place? And I'm not asking that because I don't like the idea that The Matrix is a video game. I personally don't care that it's a video game. I'm asking because Thomas Anderson, the game designer, doesn't seem to be a huge fan of the games that made him famous. I mean, Thomas maintains that they just kept some children entertained. And by the way, I question the inherent wisdom of making a video game that has a scene like this for children, unless you're going to try to tell me the game's rated M for mature, and even then, you're stretching it. The other option is that Thomas Anderson is being hyperbolic when he says he kept some children entertained. But assuming that he isn't, why in the ever-loving hell would you put a scene like this in a children's game? Why would you market something like this to children? Who are these children you say you kept entertained, and why the hell are children playing Matrix games? What the jackified f*** do you mean by kept some kids happy, Thomas? No idea, and it doesn't seem like the movie knows either. I think we can all agree that I've given this white rabbit enough of my time as is, so I decided to skip it. And my number 1 worst movie of the 2010s is Spider-Man Homecoming, aka Iron Man 4, from 2017. Yep, y'all knew this was coming. To reiterate, I've only seen this movie once in the theaters, and I haven't seen it since then. I was in a very, very bad mood when I saw this, which didn't help things. I walked out of this glorified Breakfast Club remake wanting to beat someone to death, which is never a good sign. I don't know if I'm ready to review Spider-Man Far From Home, or No Way Home for that matter. But if I do, it's going to be on a day where I feel like stabbing myself in the forehead repeatedly with a kryptonite pencil, John Wick style. A f***ing kryptonite pencil. If you've seen my review of Spider-Man Homecoming, you know that I didn't just light a fire into this movie. I wore it like a pair of motherfucking boxing gloves. 5 years later, and I'm still washing the stains of this movie's blood off my knuckles. This is probably the worst Spider-Man movie I've ever seen. Worse than Spider-Man 3, worse than Amazing Spider-Man 2, more condescending than Spider-Man 2, and it doesn't even have a Harry Osborn ass for me to break my foot off in. Spider-Man Homecoming is a Disney Channel movie made on a Hollywood budget. The movie's attitude about whether or not Spider-Man is necessary, much less whether or not he has any business being an Avenger or a crime fighter, is so far up its own ass you'd think that you were watching a napalm enema. It can't decide if it wants to be a Spider-Man movie or an Iron Man movie half the time. It reuses plot lines from the Raimi trilogy and the Iron Man sequels that were forgotten for a reason, expecting me to call it clever. It throws an already condescending ass father figure in Ben Parker under the bus, and then proceeds to run the son of a blitz over in favor of a one-sided hypocritical father-son dynamic between Tony Stark and Peter Parker that completely contradicts Tony's previous attitude about children. It undermines and all but insults Peter's intelligence by having someone else design his costume, and poorly I might add. It misuses the Spider-Man secret identity in a number of different ways, has a boring-ass high school romance that means nothing to the plot, what little there is. It has two comic relief characters in Ned and Raja that the movie keeps telling me is funny, but who I want to shoot in the face repeatedly with a double-barreled 12 gauge. It has the single most generic-ass soundtrack I've ever heard in a superhero movie since 2005's Fantastic Four, and probably the single most generic-ass soundtrack I've ever heard in an action movie since G.I. Joe Retaliation, which is just weird coming from Michael Giacchino. And there's only so much that Zendaya's offbeat charm and Tom Holland's boyhood innocence can do to make the movie even close to tolerable. And even then, it's not saying much. To say nothing of the fact that Michelle gets wrapped up in one of the most batshit plot twists I've ever seen in a superhero movie. Seriously, this movie thinks it's so damn clever with its Easter eggs, I'm surprised Michael Keaton doesn't give Peter a lecture about Kansas City Shuffle. If you know, you know. To add insult to injury with a cherry on top, the main character is a colossal dickhead who has no business cage fighting in the Bronx, let alone fighting crime or being an Avenger. Tom Holland is a very funny actor in real life, and he gives a decent performance in these films, but the character that performance is dedicated to is a boring-ass Disney Channel NPC that I barely spend any time with, inside or outside of the costume. I've had to put up with a lot of stupid-ass things when it comes to the live-action Spider-Man movies. The bastardization of Venom, the gazillion Bruce Campbell cameos that make no sense, Otto Octavius talking down to Peter Parker like a condescending prick, Peter and Wendy's jacked-up romance, Ben Parker lecturing his nephew about being responsible with powers he shouldn't even know the bastard has, while also telling him not to defend himself in freaking New York, Peter's powers themselves glitching out because of some hippie crap, Harry Osborn thinking he's hard enough to kill the motherfucking Amazing Spider-Man despite not having the faintest idea what planet he's from, and despite continually announcing his intentions like a dumbass. These fucking movies trying to convince me that Harry ever saw Peter as a friend. Max Dillon being a Spider-Man fanboy. Casting a boring-ass actress like Shailene Woodley as Mary Jane in the first place, only to not use her. Jameson being a straight-up joke of a character, and pretty much everything revolving around this jeckified motherfucker. But the suspension of disbelief required for me to believe that a Peter Parker Spider-Man who is this f***ing incompetent with his secret identity should, would, or could exist in the MCU is astronomical. The MCU version of Peter Parker is very uncomfortable to watch as Spider-Man. He's not clever, he's not funny, he's not charming, he has little to no moral code whatsoever, he has no sense of self-preservation, he's a dangerously incompetent fighter, and half the time I keep forgetting that he's supposed to be wearing a costume. Because when Peter is in Spider-Man mode, he's an entirely CGI character who looks like he stepped out of a PlayStation 3 cutscene. And I've seen PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 cutscenes online that look more dignified than this. And his voice is so high-pitched from his normal voice, half the time I can barely make out what the motherfucker is saying. If he's saying anything, period. I mean, credit to Maguire's Spider-Man where credit's due. I at least understood every bass-ackwards line of dialogue that character had. Also, quick question, why are all of the MCU Spider-Man costumes so damn ugly looking? It's bad enough that this film can't convince me that Spider-Man is actually present, it also has to make him hard to look at. Why, in the absolute fuck, do they look like this?